want to thank God for the pillars of this church, those who have stood firm and held fast. In the story that was commenting on Winston Churchill's importance to the people of England and indeed to the Western world during the Second World War, and he said there was a time in the dark days of London Blitz when the only thing that stood between England and oblivion was one stubborn old man. You know, I suspect that we have some stubborn people in this church. They too have to be stubborn about the right things. They knew how to stand firm, as Paul put it, and they held our church together. So let's hold this idea of church pillars and consider some of the characteristics that these people have. First of all, pillars stand firm in spite of personal hardships and heartaches. I know some of you walk through the valley of the shadow of death. You've had more than your share of burdens to bear. I know because many of you have already shared your stories with me. Some people going through similar experiences will feel bitterness and anger toward God and consequently others. Some unknown person has rightly said life's a grindstone, and whether it grinds a person down or polishes them up depends on what they're made of. Harold Kahn put it in a witty way. He said, some people constantly complain about their lot in life, others build on it. You have some builders in this church, and rather than letting life's hardships and heartaches make them bitter, they built on their faith in God to make them better. In his book, A Farewell to Arms, Ernest Hemingway has a line that goes like this: the world breaks everyone, and afterward many are strong at the broken places. Again, by definition, pillars are strong, are they not? Some of you are strong at the broken places. You confronted your disappointments not with despair, but with determination. And instead of clenching your fists in protest, you folded your hands in prayer. And in turn, this has made you more compassionate towards others. A man wrote to Reader's Digest not too long ago relating this incident in his church. His pastor, knowing that many members of the congregation were out of work and broke, put $100 in $1 and $5 bills into a wicker basket, explaining that the money was from the church's mission fund. And he added, I'm going to do something I've never done before in my ministry. And with that, he passed the basket of money to the congregation, urging those in need to take from it without shame. And they did. But when the basket returned, it contained $67 more than when it had started out. You know, I believe that same sort of thing would happen in this church. Because in spite of personal hardships and heartaches, there are some persons in this church who have learned to stand firm. Second, pillars of the church also manage to stand firm when the weaknesses of the organized church are all too apparent. The church is a strange institution. It's only by the grace of God that we've survived this long. Anyone who looks for something to criticize will find it. Sometimes people will find something to criticize that's not even there. An article in the Prairie Overcomer some time back revealed that a few years ago, gifts to the Prairie Bible Institute of Alberta, Canada, declined from a certain geographical area drastically. At that time, the school's president, Dr. Maxwell, had undergone 2 operations for cataracts, one for each eye. A representative of the school was visiting in the area where the giving declined, and one of the regular supporters of the school finally asked him, he said, "What's this we hear about President Maxwell driving around with 2 Cadillacs?" That was the rumor that was spread. Cataracts have become Cadillacs, and people were withholding their support. If you don't think things like that really happen, then you haven't been around the church very long. It's easy to criticize the church, but too much criticism is almost always nothing more than a smokescreen for one's own inadequacy and lack of commitment. I think we can all agree that we church people don't always live up to the highest values that we profess. In one of his books, Bruce Larson compares us to the Keystone Cops in Gilbert and Sullivan's delightful operetta, The Pirates of Penzance. The hero Frederick enlists the aid of the police in capturing some nasty pirates. And the police gather in the square while the women in town sing, "Go ye heroes, go to glory." And these comical policemen reply with endless choruses, we go, we go, we go. That does sound a little like us, doesn't it? Those beloved hymns that we sing at the end of our services. I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord, over mountain or plain or sea. Do make us sound a little bit critical. But at least we're here and we're trying. Paul says for the pillars, the brothers and sisters, to stand firm and hold fast, and they have in spite of personal hardships and heartaches, in spite of the obvious frailties of the church as an institution. But there's one more thing that I want to say about our pillars. While they have stood firm, they have also grown. There's no virtue in standing firm if you're dead. When Paul instructs us to stand firm, he doesn't mean for us to turn to stone. Rather, we should be like a tree planted by the stream of living water that the psalmist talks about. A tree stands firm, but a tree keeps growing. Many of the pillars of this church are really trees in disguise. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Chuck Swindoll tells about an incident that occurred in his church many years ago at the height of its so-called hippie movement. A young man stumbled into Chuck's church during Sunday morning service. He had long, straggly hair and a beard. He obviously hadn't bathed in several days. He'd been living on Fritos, beer, and drugs. With a dazed look in his eyes, he slowly made his way down the aisle, trying to find a seat in the packed sanctuary. And no one wanted to move over and give him a seat. It was one of those precious pillars of the church, a medical doctor who finally did so. After a while, the boy looked around and he said, "What kind of place is this?" And the doctor said, "It's a church." And the boy said, "This is a scary place, isn't it? What are people doing here anyway?" Thoughtfully, the doctor tried to answer him. "Well, people come here who are hurting to get their lives back together." And the boy pointed up to the pulpit and he said, "What do they do on that box?" And the doctor said, "The minister stands there and tries to heal with God's Spirit and Word." "And what does he say?" the boy asked. "Well, if you wait a minute, you'll hear him," said the doctor. Well, to make a long story short, the young man did stay to listen. And because of the love and kindness of that doctor and others, he became an important part of the worshiping community. He made a profession of faith in Christ and was baptized. And later he went to college, and then on to seminary. And today, he's a pastor. Now, said Chuck, that young man is the pastor to my son and his family. It's so wonderful that I can hardly believe it. It's come full circle. The young man who walked into our church that Sunday morning is now the pastor to my grandchildren. I'm glad, aren't you, that this young man sat down next to a pillar of the church. Because if he had sat down next to a nominally committed Christian, a pious put on, the story would have turned out completely different, I suspect. Some people were misled a few years ago by a survey that indicated that church members were more prejudiced than society is on a whole. Closer analysis of the results of that survey, however, indicates that the more involved a person is in his or her church, the less prejudice he or she will have. Nominal Christians have always been Christ's deadliest enemies. True pillars are like trees, standing firm and yet still growing. Do you see now why I wanted to take this time this morning to thank the Lord for the pillars of our church? I'm not implying that anyone's perfect. I'm not saying that all of us do not have room for improvement. I simply want to express my appreciation and the appreciation of this congregation to those members who have, in spite of personal difficulty, in spite of the flaws of the pastors and the congregations, have stood fast and have grown.